intentional and systematic opportunities for students to identify and play with sounds within spoken words. We come before the board today to suggest that the phonological awareness standard now read, intentional and systematic opportunities for students to identify and play with sounds of spoken language. The edit focuses on altering the wording of sounds within spoken words to sounds of spoken language. This is a small but impactful change. The rationale is that phonological instruction at the preschool level should initiate with work related to larger, more concrete linguistic units such as words, syllables, and onset and rhyme, and then progress to the smaller units of sound as children are able. It also focuses on that phonological awareness sensitivity progresses from the recognition of whole words to matching to production. And as a related note, I just wanted to say here too, expounding on what Amy Ryan said earlier, currently across North Carolina, there are 858 preschool teachers that have begun their letters training in Cohort 1. We currently have 796 preschool teachers in Cohort 2 who are enrolled, some of which have begun their training, and there are 57 districts in Cohort 3 that are presently building their implementation plans around the letters training. So that is very exciting news. Another edit that we bring before the board is to combine the print awareness and reading materials instructional standards. These two standards were presented and approved as separate standards back in October of 2021. Over the past several months, we have continued to review the research, and the following points give credence to combining the standards. You'll notice the difference in the word systematic and with print between these two standards. It seemed redundant to have a separate standard for print awareness. Print awareness is covered within the standard reading materials for pre-K. Research indicates that the reading materials and print awareness should not be teased apart. You can provide all the reading materials you want, but print awareness must be supported and modeled and encouraged with engagement by the teacher with the reading materials. They are not something to be looked at separately. An empirical investigation in the 2018 Journal of Early Childhood Literacy highlights a key point that the variety of literacy materials and print are necessary for children to have the opportunity to engage in literacy-related activities. However, support and scaffolding are required for children's use of those materials. Adult interaction improves the effectiveness of the physical literacy environment. Preschool is the only grade band with the print awareness standard included, and with these combining the two, it will align the reading materials across all grades, pre-K through 5, and I know the standards are going to 12, but certainly between pre-K and 5. Rest assured that all practices of both standards remain and that research has been reflected for both. Finally, we propose a technical change to the academic language and vocabulary literacy standard. We propose that oral language be used in the preschool standard in place of academic language. We know that oral language is directly related to reading comprehension. Written language at every level goes through the oral language system. Reading comprehension depends on oral language abilities. The preschool years are a critical time for oral language development and word learning. Preschool teachers play a critical role in fostering young children's developing receptive and expressive language, and they have a critical window of opportunity to offer oral language support when they talk, sing, read, interact with children throughout the day, during all routines, and during play. Early childhood educators need to model, facilitate, and use language all day long to foster these speaking and listening skills. Doctors Louisa Moats and Carol Tolman explain in the Letters for Early Childhood Educators manual that as children progress through the developmental stages of oral language, they use the structures of phonology, semantics, morphonology, syntax, and prosody in more complex and expanded ways. These language structures emerge as children acquire these oral language skills. The use of oral language in place of academic language in the pre-K standards provides the inclusion of all these language structures, both literal and academic. We apologize for the next minor edit of changing the word children to student in this standard. The word children is typically used in documents relating to preschool, and the use of the word children in this standard slipped by our scrutiny during our many reviews and edits. Approval of this minor edit would provide alignment and consistency with all the literacy instructional standards. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I'll turn it back over to Dr. Day.
Thank you. And if I could, Dr. Day, I know how important this work is, but we are running late, so if you could just sort of get us through the most important pieces of it.
Okay. Practices come as an update. You have all of the practices in front of you from pre-K all the way up to grade 12. This was a cross-divisional initiative across the agency. We had some key partners, Dr. Miranda Fitzgerald, Dr. Sandra Hong, the Early Learning Network were all key in creating these practices. All are research informed as they comb through meta-analyses and empirical journals to find the most recent research aligned to the science of reading. We will be sending out a survey to all CAOs this week for an opportunity for all LEAs to provide feedback. This is just a sample on the next slide of what it looks like. You can see that this is the how. One misconception is that these literacy instruction standards are taking the place of the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, but the Standard Course of Study is for students. These are practices for teachers. So these are teacher actions. So you'll see how it's set up. They're all set up the same, the teacher, and then we have those bullet points of how they're doing this, what it looks like. For the plans, we have the two plans. 387 Section 5 specifies that DPI create these two plans to assist districts with their alignment of their local C&I to the literacy instruction standards and read to achieve. Please note too that these are in draft form and we are asking for input over the next month. The model plan, you'll see on the screen, the template across the model, the non-model, and the LEA form are all the same. So as they get these materials, as leaders get this material, they're not having three different templates, three different forms. These all look very similar. So with the model, these are examples of how the literacy instruction standards would be implemented with fidelity. You'll see the component, so comprehension strategy instruction. The LIS is below that. Over to the side is the status of implementation, and within the model, of course, that will be fully. And then below that, we go through the environment, the curriculum, and the instruction of what that looks like to fully and to fidelity have that alignment. It is important to note that this does not encompass all possible elements of environment, curriculum, and instruction that would align to the literacy instruction standards and science of reading, and an absence of a practice does not necessarily indicate unalignment to the LIS or the science of reading. The non-model plan looks very similar. The only difference here is we do not have the status of implementation, and there's an extra box on the bottom that talks about the explanation. So we talk about why it is not aligned, why it is not the level of fidelity you would want to see with the literacy instruction standards and the science of reading. The LEA form will come back for action by the state board next month. This is a district deliverable, so it looks very similar. We have, it'll be by grade band. You have the topic, the LIS, the status of implementation, and then environment, curriculum, instruction, and we will train in June of how to concisely give us that explanation. It's a balance between enough information and not overwhelming districts with all the details of their literacy instruction. So just a few next steps. This shows the timeline. You'll see that districts will have until December to complete the form, to turn into DPI, and then from December 2022 till November 2023, DPI teams will consult with local leaders as needed based on what they've submitted to make local changes to their curriculum and instruction. And the next slide just shows some upcoming supports. We will do regional face-to-face training in June for leaders to help them on their way of evaluating their local literacy curriculum and instruction and filling out the form and how to read those models and non-model plans. And we will train beginning fall, spring with district teams of really getting into these literacy instruction standards and their practices. We'll have an FAQ and office hours as well to support districts in this work. The next slide is just a reminder of which ones are updates and which ones will come back for action.
Thank you both very much for that information. And are there any questions? This is an item for discussion, so any questions for either one?
I just have a quick
Our
comment,
presenters.
Ms. Chemnitz.
Yes.
I am just absolutely so proud of our team that brings all this good information to us, and I just feel like this reading is getting on a good path. It's a good place, and you'll be interested in knowing that coming to me on my cell phone were questions from a school board member about phonics, the teaching of phonics. So your presentation helped me respond. Thank you.
Thank you both. To close out this work, we have 5 consent items. The first one is Career and Technical Education Credential Attainment Report. This was presented to us last month. It included a variety of data and comparisons based on the credentials earned by North Carolina students last year. SLA 10 is a report to the JLEOC on competency-based education, on the Competency-Based Education Comprehensive Strategic Plan. We heard about this last month. It outlined the progress that staff has made towards the development of a strategic plan for a competency-based education program that provides credit by demonstrated mastery for students in grades 7 through 12 for credit recovery and acceleration. So that is a consent item, and that is the plan is in the working stages, and so I anticipate that at some point we will get that final plan before us to take a look at. And then we have 3 consent items, SLA 11, 12, and 13. Each one is a different county and high schools that applied for accreditation through the department. So those will be for action, those recommendations tomorrow. But as a reminder, this will be the last month that we consider this kind of recommendation as we await guidance from the working group that Superintendent Truitt is putting together to study our process. So we won't be seeing these for a while yet. And that concludes my meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Chemnitz. I now turn to Dr. Olivia Oxendine, Chair of the Educator Standards and Practice Committee. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine, and I chair the ES&P, and joining me in that leadership responsibility is Ms. Amy White. To kick us off today, we have 2 new business items. The first item pertains to policy TCED 004, and it has to do with the educator preparation, the EPP process for becoming initially authorized by the State Board of Education. The EPP must either be nationally accredited. If not, then we have the responsibility and the duty and role to do the initial authorization. So coming forward to walk us through the details of this item is Dr. Seibert.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'll keep this one really brief. The Community College System of North Carolina has brought an application for applying for initial EPP authorization. That application is currently in peer review at this time, and we expect that peer review to be complete in the next 2 weeks, and we'll be bringing that to the board for consideration for EPP authorization in April.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? If not, then thank you, Dr. Seiberg, and we'll move right along to the second item, which is, this item appeared last month, and we ran out of time, so didn't have enough time to give due diligence to the limited license update, so this is coming forward this week, and Dr. Tomberlin, this month I should say, and Dr. Tomberlin is going to do the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Good afternoon. I'm happy to present this update on limited license to the State Board of Education. Dr. Townsend Smith, in the interest of time, go to slide 8. The first 7 slides are a review of the statutes regarding limited licenses, and I invite board members to read that at your leisure. We're focused today on the limited license, the request from the board on information regarding the limited licenses issued by the state. We're going to cover the distribution of those licenses by local education agency, trend of early career teachers, the conversion status, to a continuing professional license of those who hold the limited licenses. Data preview by LEA. We're going to focus on 2 counties. All counties will be represented in this dashboard, but we're showing you the 2 counties with the highest percentage of limited licenses among their initially licensed teachers, and then early career teachers with limited licenses by educator preparation programs. So the first, excuse me, the first chart shows you the distribution by LEA. So the upper right-hand corner, you can see the state average is that light kind of orange color. On average, 1.2% of our early career teachers, or IPL teachers, hold a limited license. That is not uniformly distributed across the state, and this chart shows you by LEA the relative percentage or proportion of teachers with a limited license in those LEAs. So the darker the orange color, the higher the percentage. And so you can see here pointed out that white represents 0%, and that dark orange represents about 10% of the early career teachers who hold a limited license in that LEA. Next, we'll look at the trend. As the board knows, we've been bringing these limited license requests since around 2019, and this looks back at the completion cohorts. So the teachers that came into the system in 2017, what percentage of them actually went on a limited license? And you can see here that was about 0.7%. And as we progress through this, you can see it's going up. This is the cumulative total. It's going up across time at a pretty consistent rate. Next, we look at the conversion status of those folks. And for this, we've divided them into cohorts based on the expiration year of their license. So the 2020 cohort, they were issued the license in the 1920 school year. That means that their license, well, I'm sorry, they would have been issued in the 1819 school year, and their license is set to expire. This group's license is set to expire June 30th, 2022, which is about 4 months away, 3 months away, 3.5 months away. As you can see from this chart, we indicate the success towards the exam taking. That's what has caused the limited license. And so we see in cohort 1 that it's set to expire in a few months, that 86% of those teachers have not attempted the exam, that is keeping them from converting the license. Another 12% have attempted those exams, but they have not yet passed them. And then there is 2% or one person that has actually converted the license from that cohort. And as you can see, as the cohorts become more recent, we're seeing that the attempt rate or the lack of attempt rate on the exam increases across those years, with very, very few of these teachers having met the testing standards to convert the license. Next, we look at the effectiveness of these groups, and so we're comparing the effectiveness of those who hold a limited license to those who hold an unrestricted IPL. We focused on the IPLs because that's the more fair comparison. We're comparing these limited license teachers to other teachers who have not yet converted the license. As you can see, there is not a great deal of difference in the effectiveness of these teachers as a group. Probably a little more on the margins. That is, a little greater percentage of them are not meeting expected growth of their students, and some fewer are exceeding expected growth in their unrestricted counterparts. This further illustrates the point that the relationship between passing this test and the effectiveness of the teacher is somewhat tenuous and unclear. So just to look, as part of this limited license dashboard, next slide, please. Each each district has a profile in this dashboard so that they can see how their teachers are faring from the state perspective on the conversion status. And this is, we focused on Robeson County because it has the highest percentage currently in the state. And you can see from the chart there, the percentage of their initially licensed teachers over the years that have gone on a limited license, the conversion status for each of those cohorts. And you can see for those teachers in Robeson County that none of their teachers whose license is going to expire here in at the end of this fiscal year, none of them have attempted the test. The good news at the bottom is you can see that their effectiveness is not any different than their other teachers in their district who are not on a limited license but on an IPL. And then we looked at Scotland County, and in that scenario, again, you're seeing the cumulative numbers of teachers who are going on a limited license. And again, the conversion status in this district is the same that we saw before, that none of the teachers who have gone on this limited license have yet attempted the test. Here, the effectiveness data is a little bit different. You can see that that 60% of the teachers on the limited license are not meeting expectations of student growth, and that may be a little concerning. So I have to point out here that not all the teachers on limited licenses have an EVOS score. We're simply reporting the aggregate for those who do have it. And so, this chart is designed to help districts understand how they're using this tool in terms of filling their schools and addressing capacity issues. And in some cases, these teachers may be just as effective as the other teachers, and in some cases there may not be. In the next slide, we look at the percentage of the cohort, the completers of an EPP that wind up on a limited license, and these are ranked by the schools. On the dashboard, you would see the full list. We truncated this a bit for the presentation, and you can see here that students who graduated or completed a program at North Carolina Wesleyan College, about 10% of them wind up going on a limited license, and that's followed by St. Augustine completers with about 7.3% of their completers eventually going on a limited license. So we hope that this will be informative to the EPP to see how they can better support their folks in the content and passing these content exams as part of the program that they go through. And finally, here's the link to the dashboard. This is a publicly available dashboard. No individual teacher effectiveness data or status is available through this dashboard, where districts have small numbers, fewer than 5 teachers on a limited license. Some of the reporting is masked to protect the identity of teachers. It is not our intent that this dashboard is used to shame or to diminish the needs of districts in staffing their schools. It is just simply designed to give them an idea of how well this is serving those purposes and give them the information they need to make good choices about staffing in their schools. And I invite all the board members to look at that dashboard. We will keep that dashboard up and we'll keep populating it as data becomes more available, so that the board is informed of the status of these folks who are on the limited license.
Are there questions? I'll just remind the board members, we get this presentation in closed session, and I suppose it was a couple of months ago. I just felt it was probably time that we have a very good presentation and detail around this issue, because it's it's of concern to me, because it really begins to talk about preparation. And I suppose my question to Dr. Tomberlin, the 86%, I think there was 86% had not attempted. That may have been in one school district. How are the superintendents being notified? I mean, I'm sure they know this. The question probably is, do you sense there's collaboration going on between the districts and, let's say, EPPs? Because this is where a partnership needs to be established and made strong.
That's not clear to me, Dr. Oxendine, that there is that kind of relationship going on. These are folks who have completed all their program work. They've basically completed what we would consider the treatment here, that is their enrollment in an educator preparation program. And they are now out teaching. They have the license. They have completed that program. They just haven't passed the test. And of course, state law does afford them up to 3 years to do that. So as far as communication to the superintendent, that's all part of the process. It's very clear in the law that, and the affidavits are signed by both the superintendent and the presiding principal of the employee, that they will continue to work to meet the requirements to convert the license. So, there is an awareness there, and the employee, him or herself, signs documentation saying they understand the restrictions and the requirements related to the limited license. So, I mean, as far as the knowledge is there, yes. My takeaway from these data is that in an effort to support these teachers who are having trouble passing the licensure exam, the resource that has been granted to them is time. And it's not clear to me that that's the exact right resource that they need. It may be something more in way of more exposure to content knowledge, some ability to take refresher courses, but I don't think time is solving our problem here. I think it may be some other intervention that's required to help these teachers meet that requirement and move on.
Thank you very much. It is of concern to me, and I'm sure it is to my colleagues around this table. We're talking, we've just finished a discussion a few minutes ago. A little bit of factual information came out of the discussion around the number of low-performing schools that we currently have, and that number could certainly have increased over the time of the pandemic. So it's all the more pressing that we have top-notch in all categories of educators interacting with our kids every day. And so this partnership building, this is kind of the glass half empty, but maybe the glass half full, is that it will make partnerships between EPPs and school districts very sturdy. I hope so. Thank you so much, Dr. Tomberlin. That was a fine presentation. It was very necessary. And if there are no questions, comments from my colleagues, then we'll move on to the next item. And we are now moving into the action category of ES&P. And the first ES&P 1 pertains to the licensure route for, this has to do with our preschool kindergarten teachers and the policy that regulates how they can come out with a license. And I believe who is presenting? Dr. Seiberg? Dr. Tomberlin, you're back.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So this policy, LICN 002, relates to routes of licensure for our pre-K kindergarten teachers in non-public settings. It's a small change to the policy, given the sunsetting of the lateral entry license, and there was some question in the field as to what constitutes a non-public pre-K. So in the policy, we clarify that a non-public setting is one not under the authority of the North Carolina State Board of Education. And only those non-public schools that are working through the Division of Child Development and Early Education may obtain licensure through the State Board of Education. So, and then the second point of this that needed to be changed was it referenced lateral entry. And as lateral entry has sunset, we have updated the policy to reflect the residency license may be sought by those schools working through DCDEE. And their teachers can be licensed through this policy.
Any questions? We're at the question frame of PowerPoint. No questions or comments. We'll move on to the next item. The next item is ES&P 2, Teacher Education category in the Policy Manual 004. And this is the item that's returning, that's related to the University of Phoenix, who is seeking initial authorization to operate in North Carolina. And Dr. Seiberg is just going to give us an update of a follow-up discussion, that phone call that we had with this group about 2 weeks ago. Superintendent Truitt joined us in that conversation. I really feel good about the readiness of that group to join the community of EPPs in North Carolina. Dr. Seiberg, you can tell us more.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. And this is another just quick follow-up here. In the discussion item, there two questions came up in that session last month. One, I believe, was from the vice chair around can University of Phoenix share any of the program effectiveness from the other states in which they're well established, and they have provided that. That's on your e-board list there, and it essentially in there it'll provide feedback from the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, which they just recently went through. There's also a variety of surveys that they have taken of recent completers of their program. And perhaps most importantly, at least from my perspective, is the exam pass rates that are reported to the federal Title II. So you can see pretty clearly their impact on and their effectiveness in the various places that they've shared. And then the second point, which was brought up by Dr. Oxendine, was we scheduled a quick follow-up call that included Superintendent Truitt and Dr. Oxendine on how University of Phoenix is prepared to address the Foundations of Reading test as they convert from the old test that didn't have science of reading incorporated into it to the new test, which is where we're transitioning to in the state of North Carolina. And long story short, they were able to share a variety of practices that they're engaging in, both across their whole program, as well as even down into the individual courses that they're offering. And we're the board to give permission to this program to be initially authorized. Their intent is to offer programs in the area of elementary K-6, special ed general curriculum, and secondary areas including English, math, science, and social studies.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments? Superintendent Truitt, would anything to add?
Well, I would just like to say that they were very prepared in our meeting. I have special familiarity with online EPPs, and have to say that I was fully satisfied by the report that they gave us.
Absolutely. The question that came to mind today, Dr. Seiberg, has to do with the this EPP. Would the EPP be required to do the annual performance report?
Oh, yes. Yes, ma'am. Essentially any program that is deemed initially authorized, then, and that's whether they are a program that leads to a degree or whether they are a program that leads to just licensure, all of those programs play under the same rules and expectations. So they will be publicly reported on at the point at which they have data. Now, it may take a year or two to get outcome data because they have to go through the process, but we'll follow them from their first cohort forward.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
So we're ready to go to the, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We're ready to go to the discussion category of ES&P, and the first item is a JLEOC report, ES&P 3. The Educator, as a matter of fact, what a nice segue. We're going to have that report. The Educator Preparation Performance Report.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. So this is, let me get my notes here. This is an annual report that goes to the JLEOC, and on this first slide, you'll see that basically we're just laying out where the reporting obligations lie for the department associated with Educator Preparation Program performance. And essentially, we have two obligations. One is to share annual performance reports. I think of them as sort of like everything in the kitchen sink. And then they ask later on in the second portion of law, can you give us a brief update, sort of a report card sort of layout? And so both of those are now accessible online, and the link is on the next slide there. And then what we like to do at these annual presentations to the board is, in addition to just letting you know that those are now prepared for the JLEOC, we also like to comb through the data to see if there's any noteworthy findings to share about pipeline to the board, just to give you a sort of a general findings as to what's going on annually. We've divided that up into three sections. The first area we're going to investigate, which will be shared by Dr. Tomlin virtually, will be what does the new data show about the teacher pipeline in North Carolina? Then he'll hand it back to me, and I'll talk a little bit about what we can learn from the state trends on key metrics for North Carolina educator preparation programs. And then lastly, we've asked Dr. Andy Baxter, who's sitting next to me here, to share a little bit more about some of the real fascinating data visualizations that he's been working on over the past couple years, as well as where we're headed in that part. And this is all an effort to try and make sure these data are transparent and they're easily understandable to the various stakeholders across the state. So with that, let me hand it over to Dr. Tomlin to talk a little bit about the traditional route pipeline.
Thank you. So the first chart we're going to look at is the pathway to the classroom for our traditionally prepared candidates. So on the far left, you can see that between the years of 2013 and 2016, there were 14,500 people admitted to our educator prep programs. And then this chart shows you their pathway and the attrition from that pathway of those completers. So 78% of them did complete, and of those that completed, 69% went on into the classroom. That's an overall kind of employment rate from the original cohort of 54%. So this is the first thing that I want to point out to the board is of those who enter a traditional program, we're finding that a little more than half are actually teaching in North Carolina public schools within the first 3 years of completing that program. Then we go on to look at those that then taught for 3 years, and that's 6% of that group that did engage in employment. You can see below that about 12% of them, about 10%, either taught for 1 or 2 years and then left teaching in North Carolina public schools. And then we advance on to look at the total number of folks in the pipeline that were effective or above at the end of the 3rd year. And of course, we're talking about in generating growth for their student achievement. And that's about 69% of those that remain for 3 years, or 28% of the total cohort. So one of the reasons this is very important is there's some real opportunity here for us to look at what is causing the leaks in the pipeline in those first couple of stages of teacher completion and employment. We know from our data that traditionally prepared teachers are on average more effective than any other pathway, and they persist longer. And so one of the work that we need to do within the Office of Educator Recruitment and Support is really start looking into these and what are some policy levers we can do to shore up that leaky pipeline in that area. Next, we want to look at enrollment or admissions into our educator prep programs. Yes, that's the next slide, please. And this looks at the 2015 to 2021 school years. And so this is presented, you can see the change in enrollment over time. And so I'm happy to report that overall, enrollment in our state EPPs has increased 42% over 2015 enrollment rates, with a total of about 6,000 people entering into the programs. You can see some other indicators. This is disaggregated by a lot of different indicators. We can see that minority enrollment is up considerably. They're still low relative to our white population, but this is in the right direction. And then you have some license areas and the pathway. The only area that we found in this work that is not up significantly is EC. It is up 9%, but that finding was not statistically significant. And so we know that there's a dire need for EC teachers across the state. So this is another area we can focus on in our recruitment efforts.
So on the next slide here, we'll see, as far as the state trends, we see the top two graphs, the annual change of admissions into EPPs, as well as completions from EPPs since 2015, the spark line over time there. We'll see that in admissions, it's up since 2015 and then remained stable between 2020 and 2021. The number of completions is also a little bit higher than it was back in 2015 as well. And some of the admissions that you're seeing, we would expect higher, but hopefully higher completion rates in the coming years as they go through the program and ultimately come out the other side of that. And I think these are worthy of note just to look at them and reflect on how the impact of the pandemic over the past year and a half or so has or has not impacted admissions and completions into ed prep programs. And then on the bottom two slides, we looked at the percentage of traditional route candidates employed within 3 years of completing their program. And that percentage is slightly lower from back in 2015. And then in the bottom right, we also examined the percentage of traditional route candidates employed within 3 years of the point at which they completed and also taught for at least 3 years. And that's relatively stable over time. On the next slide, this slide walks through some outcome measures of EPPs across the state. The top left graph represents an overall candidate satisfaction average. So we ask a survey of recent graduates who just recently came out of an educator preparation program about the various ways they were prepared to meet the challenges of a classroom. And you'll see that over time that has remained relatively stable, that about 3/4 of folks responded that they were either well or very well prepared on average of a variety of questions that were asked on that survey. And then the employer satisfaction survey, effectively we asked the recent graduates what they experienced, and then we also asked the folks that are hiring those recent graduates what their experiences were in terms of how these new candidates were comparable or better to their perceptions of the average first-year teacher. And again, we see stability, slight increase since 2017 when we started taking the survey. Principals are predominantly all in agreement that folks are either as prepared or better than average prepared in their experience. Lastly, in the bottom two here, you'll see the teaching performance. On teacher performance as measured by NESIS, we see a slight increase in the percentage of candidates reviewed as proficient or higher on the evaluation standards. And then on student growth, there's a gradual increase in the percentage of these recent program completers either meeting or exceeding growth where EVOS data could be collected. So again, as we've mentioned in other presentations, we don't collect data across every subject, but where we have it, we're seeing an increase since 2015.
Hello. So we're moving our division, I think DPI as a whole, along to do more kind of interactive data displays. What you have in front of you is the pile on the right probably feels a little bit how you feel right now at the end of a long day of very dense data reports. So I feel your pain, but everything's important within it. That's the hard part of it. But we're coming from a system in which we have those piles and lots of static reports, and if you want to do any type of comparison across different types of educator preparation programs or subgroups, you have to kind of print them all out, look at them side by side, and make your own comparisons. Next slide, we're moving to something that's a lot more dynamic. This is an example of the type of display that is a part of the new EPP report card that went online this morning. This is where you can look at all 3 measures of the EPP accountability system and slice and dice the data in a lot of ways and kind of in one snapshot view get a sense of what's happening in the state. Next slide, please. That dashboard went online this morning. You have the link to it. Maybe on another month when you don't have quite as many items, we could come back and walk you through this dashboard, but it has a lot of deep information about the state of educator preparation in North Carolina. Next slide. As we go forward, we're looking to go kind of completely interactive. One of the things that we receive from our educator preparation programs that is hard to display in a graph are just the great narrative responses of the different types of programs, the qualitative aspect of things. But we've got some ideas about how we can incorporate that soon, as well as, like you saw with the limited license and some of the other types of analyses of human capital, some ways to kind of expand that to all parts of the teacher pipeline. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Andrew.
And so, again, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the efforts that Dr. Baxter has been putting forth is really designed to represent the snapshot or the report card, and it has a lot more dynamic interactivity, which allows folks to get exactly what they want depending on whatever it is that they're looking to get. So that's the report. With your approval, then this information would then go over to the JLEOC as a part of their annual requirements.
So should it come out of discussion and be on action on first read? What is it time sensitive right away?
It is annually. That's an excellent question. Annually, since I've been here, they have required it in the middle of December, which we can never meet because of EVOS and teacher effectiveness data. It's a time requirement that can never be met, and so annually we ask for an extension, and annually we ask for April. So we're good. So I think we're good if you wanted to, proceed to March and then approve there, and then we can move it over ahead of our April obligation.
We'll probably keep it where it is,
Okay.
so that we can get some feedback from the field if that happens.
Sure.
But a good discussion. And welcome, Dr. Baxter. Honestly, this dashboard is going to be terrific. And I'm sure that it went online today. The timing is perfect. And the EPPs probably know about it and have already been diving into it.
Mm-hmm.
Very good information. We are on the mark with technology. Okay, so the next item on the agenda under discussion is the ES&P 4 pertaining to the lifetime license, and this is covered in some legislation maybe going back 2 or maybe 3 years ago, I'm not sure. So, welcome, Dr. Evans.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to give you an update on LICN 001, and the updates contain an an endorsement update, a lifetime license update due to statute, and then policy section references. They're just corrected throughout the policy. So the first part of the update is the endorsement update. And just as a reminder, endorsements are attached to a full license area. So there's a base license, and they are added on to allow teaching for a specific subject area for 50% or less of the teaching time. But there are 3 exceptions to that, and that's the journalism endorsement, the K-12 computer education endorsement, and the psychology endorsement. And those are allowed to be full-time teaching areas. And so the endorsement update itself, we are removing endorsements for CTE, and that was under advisement of licensure and the CTE division. And we replaced those with full license areas for CTE that now exist. And so in addition, the endorsement update has the meaning of the 2+ signs, which means that that particular license area is an endorsement, and that's within the licensure area listings at the beginning of LICN 001. The second update is the lifetime license, and that is based around an update to General Statute 115C-270.20. And what this license allows is for a professional educator, and a professional educator in this sense is a licensed teacher, administrator, or student services personnel, and this license does not require a renewal. So in order to qualify for this particular license, an individual has to be currently licensed as a professional educator, so one of the 3 options, a teacher, administrator, or student services personnel, and they must meet one of the following criteria. So it's either complete 30 or more years of credible service with teasers or the Teachers and State Employees Retirement System, or complete a combined total of 30 or more years of employment as a licensed teacher, administrator, or student services personnel in one or more public school units in North Carolina. So public school units, just as a reminder, they include charter schools, obviously LEAs, and also the laboratory schools. And the next slide provides a summary, so a reminder of the either or option, and that you must be a currently licensed teacher, administrator, or student services personnel in North Carolina, and then also provides a definition of what currently licensed means, that you don't have an expired license, because in many cases, this is focusing on retirees. So they must follow the license renewal process for retirees in order to qualify for this license. Any questions?
Any questions? I do see a question, and yes.
Thank you so much for the information. Sure. And I did have one question. I've seen several teachers who have asked the question, when we say 30 years of service, does that mean if you take like a year of sick leave to retire at 29 years plus 1 year of sick leave, are you still able to qualify for that license?
So that's a very good question. If it is documented through teasers and part of that 30 years of credible service, then that would count.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, very good. Thank you so much. Good job. And we will move to the next item, and this pertains ES&P 5, and this has to do with that year of credit given to the MSA Intern. So I would imagine Dr. Seiberg, Dr. Tomberg.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Yes, so this is a recommended change to policy LICN 006 for experience credit for Masters of School Administration interns. We have some changes both to that and to the graduate pay listing or policy. So if we can advance to the next slide. As you'll recall, we brought you these scenarios where experience may be granted through a combination of the internship and and employment within the year of internship. So many of our interns go ahead and become employed as APs with the districts prior to full completion of the internship. So we had several scenarios where this would not cause a problem, that they would qualify for the year of experience, but there was one specific case where it did not, they would fail to meet either one of those requirements. And so we, at the board's recommendation, we returned to Pepsi to suggest a recommended solution to this problem. And you will see Pepsi's recommendation for this policy change on the next slide. Yes, so we've added a bullet, any combination of internship experience and employment experience in an academic year that satisfies the 6-month employment requirement for experience credit. So it can be any combination of internship and employment that would satisfy the 6-month requirement to grant experience credit on the license. So there's the full list of the policy recommendations with that number 4 added there that we're asking for your approval on. The next section has to do with graduate pay and a finding that the policy was out of alignment with the statute. It's simply a changing an or to an and for qualifying for graduate pay. I do believe we discussed this last month. This has not changed. And again, to facilitate folks' understanding of their qualification for that graduate pay, we have listed the policy for graduate pay as it was in effect on June 30th, 2013. So folks are aware of what qualifies under Section B of that policy statement.
And we are at the question frame of the PowerPoint. Are there any? Let me pose a scenario, Dr. Tomberlin. I'm thinking about the additional year of experience for the MSA intern. So the way it is written in policy would eliminate the possibility of an intern who is in a program whereby the internship is sprinkled across courses.
Sprinkled across, I'm sorry, what?
Let's say the internship is defined, let's say by an EPP, as being part of a course, let's say several courses.
Okay.
It's integrated. It's an integrated internship.
So if the intern, regardless of, so I'm assuming what you're getting at is I've got part of that intern experience in one academic year, and then the other part of that internship in a subsequent academic year.
Not really. It's the internship is treated alongside, let's say, all the courses in the program of study.
Right. So one of the stipulations for if that, it's quite common for universities to award course credit for things like internships or work on dissertations or something like that. So the course bearing doesn't necessarily play a role in this. It really is about whether the intern in that time frame, in that school year, met the obligation of working as at least 6 months in either the internship capacity or employed as an AP. So we wouldn't trace that back to whether there was a course connected to that internship, which I think is what you're getting at. But if I'm not understanding, I'm happy to discuss this with you.
Let's talk about it at a different time, because I think it really rolls into the next item in terms of the principal license. So we'll make some time to talk about it and get some additional clarification around that. Any questions? Okay, hearing none, we will go to the next item. That is ESNP 6, revised licensure requirements for the school administrator, and Dr. Seibert has that item.
Okay, so this is a continuation of some discussion we've had together a couple of months now. This is a quick reminder. I'm not going to go through all the great detail and level of granularity that I did last month. Essentially, 115C-284, which is related to principal preparation and expectations of principal preparation. We found that we, as a state, were not in compliance with some of the components, specifically around licensure exam, whether specifically the MSA is required in terms of defining the year-long internship and the 4 years of classroom, specifically classroom teaching experience. And that's been in place for some time. Last fall, with on the next slide, with SL 2021-170, what we saw was the lawmakers resolved these issues for anybody that had not met those requirements in the past. It also solved for any candidates in the pipeline who may not be in compliance but are somewhere in the middle of their learning process for certification. But it did not account for anyone entering the pipeline after August 31st of 2022. And so that means that anyone beginning a program after that time would all be subject to the requirements that are currently in 115-284. And so that's what this discussion item is about. The next two slides are around framing the work to help the board think about what actually needs to be in place regarding principal preparation. And then if you go, I think we're about 3 slides down now. So that's the framing of the work, and then the the stakeholder recommendations, not the slide holder recommendations, the stakeholder recommendations. That's what I brought last month. So we collected information from a variety of stakeholders, and I've sort of summed that up in the next 2 slides, the slide in front of you and the next slide. And again, that was last month, and then what we did was we took that information over to the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission to get them to weigh in on, based on the feedback that they're hearing from the various stakeholders that we've collected, what is their take as sort of to add another point of reference to your collective thinking as to the perceptions of the field and how ultimately you would like to see this move forward. On the next slide, you'll see those recommendations from Pepsi. In just a second. There they are. So the first is to discontinue the license exam requirement. That was unanimously heard from the 3 groups that we heard from, and in lieu of the exam requirement, have performance-based assessment in a school setting, as well as specifically the performance-based assessment included as a piece of a broader portfolio as a requirement for that process. In terms of the Masters of School Administration requirement, this is the idea that if you're going to become a principal, you have to not just have a principal's license, but you have to have a specific master's degree in school administration. The recommendation from Pepsi would be to require a master's in school administration as one route, but also offer a master's degree in another field. So essentially allow folks that have a master's degree in another field to be allowed to pursue that and not necessarily have to get a whole additional MSA program degree. And they would require an add-on licensure program if they already have a master's degree. So again, to avoid having to do a whole second master's degree entirely. Regarding the year-long internship, as folks have been thinking about defining that, the length of time, the range of time they recommend is to, they didn't leave a top end, but they said that they felt like it should be no fewer than 500 hours. And the duration and components should be appropriate to the desired performance outcomes for the year-long internship. So essentially trying to make sure that the year-long internship is taken into consideration in that process. And then lastly, the teaching experience. This group agreed that 4 years of experience within a licensure area for certified personnel in school settings. So what they're basically saying there is this would allow for folks that are in a school setting like counselors, social workers, school psychiatrists to be allowed to pursue the MSA program going forward, not just those folks that have specifically classroom teaching experience. And those are the recommendations that we collected for you to add to the information to help make your decisions. And again, I just want to remind the board that while the deadline for folks entering the preparation for principal licensure is in August 31st of 2022, a lot of those programs are in the process of recruitment right now. And so just keep that in mind as you're thinking about this, because the decisions that you're making now are not policy decisions. They're ultimately going to be recommendations back to the lawmakers to consider whether they're going to change the law as you see what is best fit for the field for principal preparation. So there's a couple of processes that have to happen in order to stay ahead of that August deadline.
Are there any questions? No questions? Yes, there is a question.
Can you just expand a little bit on when it talks about the year-long internship, where it says duration and components appropriate to the desired performance outcomes?
Let me see where that
It
is.
is on the Pepsi recommendation under the year-long internship. Slide number 9. Just so that I have an understanding of what that.
I think what they were trying to say there is that their hope is that the ultimately the range or the number that's set by the board would be commensurate with the duration and the requirements that would be typical of a year-long internship across a traditional preparation program. In other words, that it has that length of time.
And
So-
then the, just one other question,
Sure.
just about the 500 hours, like, do we have a rationale behind that number?
I'm trying to think if there were so many numbers that were bantered about in that. I don't know that I think what they were taking was a minimum requirement, and let me see if my colleague, if you can recall anything on that, Dr. Evans. I don't. Oh yeah, it was it was stemming from NCACTI's contribution. NCACTI is the one of the stakeholder groups that came from the previous month's presentation, and their collective range was 300 to 500 was their initial recommendation, and that's stakeholders from across the educator preparation programs across the state.
And I do remember saying that there was just a little bit of concern about the 500 hours and not being a lot of service time. And as you know, the principals have talked about, just from the field, that internship is just one of the most important components. And so just some consideration about the number of hours, I think, is a concern.
Yeah. Thank you so much for adding that comment. Superintendent Truitt.
And to follow along with that question, is there going to be some sort of sliding scale for those participating in a part-time program for that hours, for those 500 hours?
Yeah, the general consensus was to try and keep the requirements the same, whether you're in a part-time program or a full-time program, that the requirement be held constant for both.
Okay.
Other questions or comments?
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes, Dr.
Mr.
Tomberlin.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to clarify one point that came to this, and I apologize, Dr. Steiberg.
Sure.
On the deadline of August 31st, 2022, the requirement is that they have completed at least one course towards the MSA by that date. So it's not enrollment, it's completion of a course. So you will, in this upcoming cohort, you will have disparity between those who have gotten that one course under their belt, they'll be held to one set of standards, they'll be held to the waiver, but you'll have many entering those programs that will be held to whatever the whatever the statute is currently, or whatever it's changed to. And so I want to reiterate the urgency around the recommendation to the General Assembly, because we're going to have that cohort that's kind of a class divided in terms of their expectations.
That is good clarification. A couple of, probably more than a couple points that I'd like to make. I wish, because I think the legislative language, whatever it turns out to be, is going to be exactly what the EPPs are going to pay a lot of attention to. So the more clear the language is around things like the portfolio, I wish that we had had more specificity around what is a portfolio, what is contained, what are the basic elements that need to be in a portfolio. The standardization, I would suspect, since 2011, the standardization of the evidences that make up a good portion of an electronic portfolio probably need to be updated, revisited, and re-standardized. I believe it is very possible to have a minimum number of internship hours set at 750 as the minimum, and that could include summer sessions. A typical, I'm going to use an example, it would not be a stretch for an intern to have 250 hours starting in the fall by December. So that would be 50% of the minimum that Pepsi is recommending. We still have another semester of school to go. So I do think the minimum, especially if we are also saying that you do not, in North Carolina, to be licensed as a principal, you no longer have to have classroom, I'm calling it EVOS-based instruction. That 750 probably isn't enough, because I think the large part of the internship, especially for the individual who has a master's degree, but yet let's say in counseling or school social work, just needs to have deep understanding of the classroom, what it means to teach, what good teaching looks like, what it means to lesson plan, what it means to evaluate, what it means to have conferences with parents, on and on. So 750 seems to be that's my wish. Another item I would have wished for, and I don't want to take away from the hard work of Pepsi. I had a good talk, a very good conversation with Dr. Miller a few days ago, and I'm so appreciative of Pepsi, but I just think that if we are going to reduce the number of 400 low-performing schools in North Carolina, we're going to have strong leaders. And those strong leaders need to know so much about instruction. So the portfolio needs to be strengthened. We need to have some specificity around that. The General Assembly may say, come back, give us more specifics around what is this thing called a portfolio. The 750 hours as a minimum for the internship is what I would have liked to have seen. And then I am so glued to the notion of and I always will be, that principal needs to know, again, I'm being repetitive, needs to know the classroom. And I'll just end it with this. There is a chapter in a course in a textbook that I use in one of my courses. And it's about the beginning of the principalship in America. It's an excellent chapter. And it opens by saying the principalship in America evolved from a halo of chalk dust. That says it all to me. It says it was that classroom teacher who was strong, outstanding, and somewhere along the way he or she decided, I want to be a principal, or maybe they were tapped to be a principal. So these are my concerns, and I just hope that the best comes out of this. Ms. White.
Just tagging on to what you would say, an additional comment under the Masters of School Administration recommendation or a master's degree in another field. My concern would be the area of finance and how critical knowledge of school finance is, even at the school level. And a master's degree in a particular subject area won't give that individual the exposure and expertise that they need, so that we must add some sort of component. If we're only accepting the master's degree, we've got to have some way to educate them about how to use all those funds that are available to them and how they can realign positions to maximize teacher efficacy or school personnel on their campus. So
Well, and
I'll
that-
highlight school finance, and that's a gap if they're not taking the MSA.
Good point. Other thoughts? Very good. Thank you so much, Dr. Seiberg. And we'll move to the last item of ES&P. And this is ES&P 7, the state of the teaching profession. And this is going to be Dr. Tomberlin.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. So I am pleased to deliver the annual State of the Teaching Profession report for the 2020-2021 school year. If you have Dr. Childs Smith a minute to
Getting there, give us a second. Let's go ahead and start, Dr. Tomlin. There are some technical difficulties on this end.
Sure. So to begin this report, I do want to say that in this report we find, as we've seen in every year that I've brought you this report, on average, the teaching profession is stable. Around 92 or 93% of our teachers remain employed with North Carolina Public School from year to year. In the 2021 year, we did see a slight uptick in the attrition rate to 8.2%, which is up from last year's 7.53%. So that is an increase of 2/3 of 1 percentage point from that time. And in the chart when the presentation is available to you, you can see the raw numbers there. But basically, 626 more teachers left this year than they did in the prior year, but still well within what we would think is average. And one of the things I do for you in the presentation is to contextualize this. So looking back, there we go. Excellent. And there are the numbers there. We can see a slight uptick of 8.2%. But on the next slide, we can see the historic averages, and whether we decide this is out of range of what we would expect. We go back and look at the historic average back from 2016, and those vertical lines represent the range of what we would expect as normal or in any given year. And you can see that in early years we were on the high end of that normal. In the two most recent years, we were on the low end, but this year falls squarely in the middle of what we would consider normal. In addition to attrition, we look at teacher mobility, how much teachers move from one LEA to another. And that is another stable statistic that hovers around somewhere between 4.5% to 5%, a little under 5% every year. In this year, we've found that the mobility rate was down to about 2.9 or a little under 3% for teachers. And that's well outside of the range of normal. And that's quite understandable given the difficulties, one, of the housing market in the state of North Carolina in this time, as well as the difficulty of relocating due to COVID and the pandemic. So on this graph, I've really blown these numbers up so that you can see these differences. But the next slide shows you the attrition and the mobility rate across those years. if I put this on a 100-point scale. And that really helps you see how low these rates are in the state. If we could go to the next slide. So there's those same mobility rates plotted on a 100-point scale. The attrition rate is very small compared when we look at other industries, especially other industries during the pandemic year. The teaching profession has remained remarkably stable throughout that first year of the pandemic. Next, we look at attrition by years of experience. This looks similar to many others. That dip in the 0 years of experience. We're not quite sure what's going on with that, but that may be more missingness of data related to 0 years of experience than any actual effect. But it's this classic U-shaped curve where we see higher attrition rates in the beginning of the career and then much higher attrition rates towards the end of the career due to retirement. Here are some categories of interest and their associated attrition rates. On average, that's the next slide, our experienced licensed teachers have a little under an 8% attrition rate. Beginning teachers that are highlighted there, because that's always a concern for us of how well our beginning teachers are supported, have a slightly higher average of 9.75. This is actually down from that discrepancy in other years where the beginning teacher rate has been demonstrably higher than the experienced licensed teacher rate. So these are a little more in line. And there's some other areas of interest on teacher attrition. So as far as the reason codes go, we did experience decline overall in some of the reasons. So personal reasons declined over the prior year. Reasons associated with initiated by the LEA, so dismissals and things like that, are down for this year. However, the other reason category is dramatically up, and we don't know if this is due to other factors that we're not accounting for causing this change, or if there was just more difficulty in collecting these data given the pandemic. Next, we have attrition by region. And we can see that the Southeast and the Sand Hills region experienced the highest percentages of teacher attrition in the state, with the Western and the Northwest and the Western experiencing the lowest attrition rates in the state. And this is all consistent with previous years of this report. Another feature of this that's of great importance is the vacancy rates. The vacancy rates were up slightly from prior years. We usually, I think in the previous report, the 40th day vacancy rate was around 2.2 to 2.5%, somewhere in that neighborhood. It is up about a percentage point from the prior year to 3.4. But I do want to point out the vacancy. We also measure the first day. We do this to demonstrate the extreme hard work that our LEAs do in staffing schools from the first day to the 40th day. You do see that reduction, and I have to point out that that doesn't accurately reflect the reduction, because even in that time from the first to 40th days, there are more resignations and more vacancies that occur that the districts have to contend with. So it's not the same numbers there. It's actually different positions becoming vacant in that 1 to 40th day. As part of the legislative report, we report on the vacancies by subject areas and the total number of vacancies. That's the next slide. And we can see that core subjects in K-5, our math, ELA, science, and social studies teachers represents the highest number of vacancies. And you'll notice this is not a percentage because we don't have solid numbers on what the overall number of these K-5 positions are in the state. So we can only report this as a measure of magnitude, not a percentage. Exceptional teachers, again, are in high demand. This is especially concerning given what we showed you about the pipeline earlier in one of our presentations, that the enrollment for EC teachers is not up significantly. And so this will continue to be a concern in this area. So I'm happy to report to the State Board of Education that the state of the teaching profession is stable in light of the pandemic. We do not see a dramatic increase in teacher attrition. If you take this information with the information provided about the pipeline, enrollments in our educator programs are up. And in general, we do not see major issues facing us in terms of the teacher pipeline and the health of the teaching profession in the state of North Carolina.
Excellent. Questions or comments of the advisors, colleagues? So it's a nice summary. The state of the profession is stable, no erratic shifts in attrition is what I heard, and there was one final comment, but overall it's a good report. Sounds very good. So that concludes ES&P. Do we have I'm sorry.
I just wanted to ask a quick question. When we go back up to the reasons that teachers are leaving, when they fill out the form around the reasons, how many reasons do they get to choose or select for their reasons for possibly leaving a district or leaving the field? Is it just, do they only get to select one?
They generally provide the reason, and the district codes it appropriately to one reason among the reasons that are available. Does that help? So if the response of the teacher is, I'm dissatisfied with the teaching profession and I'm going to go look for a job in another state, that would be coded to dissatisfaction with the teaching profession. So they have to, yes, they have to choose. If there are multiple reasons for the departure, the teacher does not. We do not collect the multiple reasons for that departure.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to add to what Dr. Trumbull was saying. That's true. There are several options from which they can choose, but there's also another they can write in a reason. So there is that. And it might not fit into any of the categorical statistical columns that we have. I think that what it would generally be is other would be placed into one of the existing categories.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Truitt.
Dr. Tremler, can you confirm, are there 23 or 28 different reasons to choose from?
That is in the report. I think it's somewhere in that neighborhood, somewhere in that range of 23 to 28. I do have to say that we did not update the reason codes for this report to include issues related to the pandemic. But I can say that there was a dramatic increase in the category of other reasons, reason unknown. I'm resisting the urge to kind of infer that that might have had something to do with COVID, but I don't know. I think it's probably more related to difficulty in the data collection given the pandemic than maybe the pandemic itself.
Can I follow up, please?
Absolutely.
And so this was the information from the 2020-2021, correct? So
Yes, ma'am.
do we have any information possibly from our districts or schools around how things are going right now in real time? That might be a really hard question.
Yeah, that's one of the difficulties of this report is it's always looking back a year because it takes quite a bit of time and effort to collect all these data. And so we're always running a year behind in the reporting. So this was March 2020, which, as many of you remember, was the period which the state went into the schools. We stopped having teachers and students report to schools, and it follows it all the way through March of the following school year.
Other questions or comments?
Can I follow up one more time? I'm sorry.
Take it away.
I'm sorry. I see these are my people we're talking about.
I know.
So,
Absolutely.
I just say all that to say I have been traveling quite often through our state from the mountains to the sea, and I am quite concerned of the level of support that my colleagues across the state are getting. And I definitely do not want one of the other reasons to be a dissatisfaction around support. We heard today many contracts are going to be going into a full effect, and those are us implementing that. So just making sure that our educators are fully supported in every way, shape, or form in order to make sure that we are giving kids our very best. When we look at a number, I saw one of the numbers that said like 690 K through 5, and for me that means that there are 690 vacancies. Thus, some child in North Carolina is not getting the absolute best, right? They're not getting that person in front of them, and I get a little concerned about that, and making sure that we are being as supportive as possible and sharing those best practices around what we can do to make sure that all kids are getting every possible thing that they deserve. That's all.
Very good. Thank you so much. And that concludes ES&P for this month.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. I'll now turn to Ms. Amy White, Chair of the, what do we call you? Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee, our last committee of the day. Ms. White.
Exciting committee of the day.
Saving the best for last.
Do the 5-second shakedown, you know. Okay, let's just get the ball rolling here with just a brief pause of personal privilege, because last month, in honor of Black History Month, I gave a quote from Senator Vernon Malone. So this month, in honor of Women's History Month, I want to highlight Helen Keller with a couple of different quotes that just absolutely echo everything that we've talked about here today. She said, "The only thing worse than being blind is having sight, but no vision." She also said, "Often we look so long at the closed door that we do not see the one that has been opened for us." Then she said, "Alone we can do so little, and together we can do so much." And then she said, and this is a reminder to every teacher across our state, "I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And I must not fail to do the something that I can do." And that means that every day that we open doors into schools across the state of North Carolina, our teachers do the something that they can do. And that something is teach. Item number 1 is a new business item that we just wanted to get you thinking forward about the innovative school district. This is new business. Senate Bill 105 basically states that the innovative school district shall continue to operate Southside Ashpole Elementary School as an innovative school until the State Board of Education adopts and executes a transition plan to return the school to Robeson County Schools. And I want you to know that Dr. Jordan and his team have been absolutely working hard on this, and he's going to give you just an update on that so that hopefully we can put something before you for action next month.
Thank you very much, Ms. White, and good afternoon, Chairman Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, and other members of the Board of Education. As Ms. White just indicated, Senate Bill 105 directs that the transition of Southside Ashpole Elementary School be concluded no later than the end of next school year. Efforts were already underway before this was codified because of the fact that NCDPI has been serving as the temporary ISO. And so the statute that authorizes that to happen required us to begin that transition process. We are so pleased, as we shared with you in January, that We are working alongside of Dr. Freddie Williamson and his team. They have been integral in the planning, and we are looking forward to continuing to button up some of the elements so that we can present a final plan to you next month. Next slide, please. You see here the 4 dates that have been considered with an asterisk beside July 1st because, as you know, Dr. Williamson indicated when he was here last that the preference is to have Southside Ashpole transferred back no later than the start of the upcoming school year. After having internal conversations, we believe that is doable, and we also identified some reasons why at least 2 other dates would not be appropriate. So August 1st and January 2nd would create some challenges on the finance side and some other pieces. And so for that reason, and given the desire or the request from the Public Schools of Robeson County, July 1 is the preferred date. And Dr. Williamson asked that I share that he's unable to be with us today because of an unavoidable conflict, but he did want me to reiterate their readiness and desire to see Southside Ashpole transition prior to the start of the new school year. On this final slide, what you have are the areas of focus for us as we have engaged in this transition planning. The timeline and communications piece is basically undergirded by the commitment to stakeholder engagement, transparency, and compliance. We know that there is a substantial finance piece of this, and so we are working in tandem with our internal folks to ensure that the budgeting, accounting pieces are taken care of, and there are some much finer elements related to federal programs that we will need to attend to. With respect to human resources, the licensure piece is certainly at the forefront of our mind, particularly as we move into contract renewal season. I am happy to again share that the Public Schools of Robeson County intend to employ everyone who is eligible for employment. And we have offered and will continue to offer consultation opportunities to those staff people who have questions about what they need to do in order to shore up any outstanding licensure requirements and or general questions about what that transition looks like from an employment standpoint. With respect to operations, there is an emphasis on transferring assets, student records, personnel files, termination of contracts, etc. The good news is that the Public Schools of Robeson County have already been at the forefront of the work related to transportation, child nutrition, and they have made some considerable contributions in the area of facilities improvement. So that is certainly going to be an area that we are already ahead of the curve on. Supports from NCDPI and the State Board, we've heard loudly and clearly, both from the State Board, our State Superintendent, as well as PSRC, that we shouldn't just push them off a ledge and wipe our hands. We are committed to locking arms and ensuring that the transition is not only smooth, but that they have some support for at least a year. And in working with Dr. Williamson, we've identified principal coaching, curriculum leadership, and restart flexibilities as the primary areas, as well as the Innovative Partnership Grant, which we are waiting for some advice on whether or not that grant will transfer along with the school. There have been questions about is Southside Ashpole going to close. There has been absolutely no indication that the school is going to close. Dr. Williamson has been fully committed, along with his staff, to involving the teachers in trainings and other partnerships. So the transition is underway, and the next step in that process will be coming to you next month with a formalized plan for that transition. I'd be remiss if I did not acknowledge Doctors Hargrave and Gooch. They've been at the forefront of this work, and Dr. Gooch has outlived everybody. Most of us are new to the ISD, and we've come in not looking behind us, but looking forward and concentrating on ensuring that we do what we can to provide a solid education for the students served at Southside Ashpole. Available for any questions that you may have.
Questions? Thank you for always recognizing your team, and thank you, Dr. Hargrave and Dr. Gooch, for being a part of that team, carrying this forward.
Thank you.
Appreciate your work. We'll step over to action on first read, and Dr. Bilbro Berry is going to put before you a request for approval for a brand new UNC lab school, and it's a partnership between UNC A&T and Guilford County Schools. You did hear about this briefly last month, but thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you.
Great, it's my pleasure. As she mentioned, we were here last month. We have great news. Our folks at Guilford County Schools have agreed to partner with North Carolina A&T. This is our first HBCU within our lab school network. We're just so excited. Going to be a unique opportunity for students. They will have grades 3 through 5, looking at a STEAM focus. They'll start in the fall. Our statutory obligation is that we open 9 schools by fall of 2022. No pressure. But we are working along that route and hope that this will be a great partnership. And so we seek your approval for that resolution that was passed. We did hope to bring UNC's Carolina Community Academy also to you this month, but the board meeting for their intended partner is not till next week, and so we hope that we will have a favorable response from the board so that we can formally announce that partnership and come back to you in April. They have an extensive ready-to-open checklist that they've been working on since September, so they're chugging along. We're getting through these processes, and it'll be a great opportunity for partnership, but then most importantly, providing some unique supports from our universities to students who are within the lab schools. So any questions?
Questions? We're excited. We're apologize to you that you have to come back before us next month, but a worthy cause, and we appreciate the due diligence that they're doing on the ready to open checklist to make sure that they're prepared, and we'll be excited to hear from you again in April.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so EICS 2 is the Charter School Advisory Board recommendation regarding Torchlight Academy. Board members, if you'll remember, in November of 2021, it was brought to our attention that there were concerns about significant violations of the administration of the Exceptional Children's Program at Torchlight. As a result of that information, on December 7th, Torchlight and its respective leaders were asked to make a report to CSAB. And on December the 16th, the State Board of Education met. We heard the recommendation from CSAB, and we placed them on level 3 non-compliance for these reasons. Grossly negligent administrative oversight of the EC program, failure to properly implement the individualized education program process as mandated by the IDEA, alteration and falsification of EC student records, lack of federally mandated maintenance of effort for the previous 3 consecutive years, the inability and or failure to provide access to NC DPI EC staff to EC student and finance records when requested, lack of qualified staff in the EC program, falsely reporting staff's compliance with every child accountability and tracking system that's known as ECATS, and finally, failure to provide all documentation requested by DPI. At the end of that meeting, we wanted to give We did place them on level 3 noncompliance, but we allowed them the opportunity to submit information that would rectify all of the items that were mentioned. And at the January 6, 2022 meeting, the State Board of Education unanimously approved the following motion, that the information be remanded to the Charter Schools Advisory Board to conduct a further investigation and to allow them to provide materials. There was a meeting that was originally scheduled for January the 26th by CSAB, but that was rescheduled for February the 8th. On February 8th, that meeting was also rescheduled due to a medical related request, and so CSAB met earlier this week on February the 28th, 2022. The school was allowed the opportunity to present materials beforehand. A discussion was had at that meeting, and before us today is just Mr. Dave Machado to talk through what occurred during that meeting. And board members, I placed some information at your desk for your review. And I also might need to recognize Ms. Cheryl Turner for her time here today as she chairs the Charter School Advisory Board. At this time, I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you, Ms. White. I'm just going to introduce Cheryl Turner, the chair of the Charter School Advisory Board, to explain the recommendation that CSAB made. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As was mentioned, the Charter School Advisory Board met on Monday, February 28th. We had presentations from the Office of Charter School, the Exceptional Children's Division, federal programs, and Finance and Business Services, the Northeast Raleigh Academy doing business as Torchlight Academy, that's the board of the actual school, as well as Torchlight LLC, who is the management company. We had 7 hours of presentation, and following that, we passed the following motion. The Charter School Advisory Board recommends to the State Board of Education that the charter agreement between the State Board and Northeast Raleigh Academy, doing business as Torchlight Academy, be revoked for the following reasons. Violations of law and regulations, including special education laws and federal conflict of interest and self-dealing regulations. Violations of the charter agreement, including failure to provide requested documents and failure to provide adequate oversight and management of the school. Failure to meet generally accepted standards of fiscal management, failure to retain and provide to DPI required documentation of expenditures of state and federal monies and complying with other fiscal requirements, allowing the ongoing self-dealing and conflicts of interest by the EMO Torchlight LLC. The motion was made by Mr. Friend, second by Mr. Eldridge, and was unanimous.
Thank you, Ms. Turner. Board members, do you have questions about the information presented by Ms. Turner at this time? Okay, not hearing any, I will also mention that there may be a possibility that additional information might be shared during closed session, but we'll be back before you voting on this item tomorrow. Thank you so much for your time today on presenting that recommendation. Let's move to action. Action is EICS 3. This is Ms. Sneha Shah Coltrane with a new cooperative innovative high school recommendation. There are 3. You heard about these schools last month. One is Cabarrus Early College of Health Science. 2 is Edge Academy of Health Science. And the Wake Early College of Info and Biotech.
Everything's happening.
Sorry for that interruption. Does anyone have a question for Ms. Sneha Shah Coltrane about these 3 new cooperative innovatives? Okay, hearing none. Thank you for being here and being willing to ask questions, though. EICS 4 is Unity Classical Academy's request to expand its enrollment. You did hear about this last month. Mr. Machado is here to answer any questions. This is an expansion request that is due to a facility expansion at Unity Classical, and it does fall within the constraints of expansion. Originally, it did not meet the original criteria, but because the school was under a facility expansion and they were limited in its existing building, this qualifies, and they are before us requesting approval of its enrollment.
Thank you again, Ms. White. This school has an enrollment of, right now it's serving K-6 with 359 students. It's approved to be a K-8 school. They're allowed to increase to 468, and they're asking State Board of Ed to approve an increase to 600, which is 133 above the allowed 30% growth. So that's why we're bringing it to the State Board for approval. One of the criteria is that you can approve this if a school is in a construction project, which they are. They actually moved into this building in February. They were supposed to move in last summer. The building wasn't ready. They had to stay in their temporary location, which was a church that could not accommodate the additional growth. That's why they're holding the growth off, making this request now. If you remember, you did approve, or they were brought to you to talk about this last year, but it was tabled because the building wasn't ready. So again, there will be next year, if you approve this, K-7 at 600 students. The following year, there'll be K-8 at 799. Again, K-8 at 909, and when they're totally built out, there'll be K-8 and 900 with 912 students. They've already received over 600 applications for these extra spots, so they certainly have proven that they have the interest to fill them.
Questions about this request for expansion? Okay, hearing none, thank you. We'll move right on to the 2022 charter school renewal recommendations. Board members, there were 27 applications this year. Renewal applications this year. And so we've broken those down for you. We had the chance to see each of those and discuss them last month. The schools recommended for 10-year charter renewal are the Academy of Moore County, Stars Charter, Phoenix Academy, Research Triangle High School, Northeast Carolina Prep, Beargrass, Corbian Community School, Cornerstone Charter Academy, and Triangle Math and Science Academy. These all met the statutory requirements for a 10-year renewal. Are there any board member questions about these schools recommended for 10 years? Hearing none, we'll move to 7-year renewals, and that's Emerald at Bladen, Guilford Prep Academy, College Prep and Leadership Academy, and Waters Edge Village School. These 4 have been recommended for 7 years. Are there any questions about those 4? Okay, and then finally, the schools that have been recommended for 3 years are ACE Academy, Charlotte Secondary, Carter Community Charter, Dillard Academy, Discovery Charter School, Hiawassee Tribal School, Johnston Charter Academy, Lakeside Charter Academy, Movement School, Reaching All Minds Academy, Rollsville Charter Academy, and United Community. Are there any questions about the 3-year renewal recommendations? Great. There are 2 schools that did not receive renewal recommendations, and those 2 are Uproar Leadership Academy and 3 Rivers Academy. Are there any questions about those 2? Okay, thank you very much. Let's move to our discussion item then, and this is our 2021 charter school application recommendation. This is the result of many months of time, effort, discussion, interview, review, any other words we need to put on that, Ms. Turner, for your, these, I'm gonna call these, most people call them Cliff's Notes, we're gonna call them Dave's Notes, but at the bottom on eBoard, you will find a document that summarizes the schools that are being recommended for approval, and it will tell you all of the highlighted information that we talk about at the board table. I encourage you to use that as a reference tool during the next month as you consider these applications. We've broken them down for you on the home page for those that have been approved, and then those that did not receive approval. Mr. Machado and Ms. Turner, I'll turn it over to you.
I would like to add that these schools, there's 7 of them that will be scheduled to open up in fall of 2023. They'll go through their planning and ready to open training next year, and they'll open up fall of 2023. Mr. Turner, you want to? Do you have any questions? Would you like me to go over the specifics of each school? Okay.
Was that a yes?
The first school is great opportunities for boundless innovation for girls, commonly known as Go Big. They're in Mecklenburg County. The first year, they're going to be K2 with 300 students. Year 2, K3, 400. Year 3, K4, 500. Year 4, K5, 600. In year 5, K6 was 700. They will be participating in the National Lunch Program. They will be offering transportation. They are implementing a weighted lottery. They have not located a facility yet, but they will be in the zip code of 28217. No impact statement. This is a repeat applicant. They had came last year in front of CSAB, and they were proposing to be a boarding school for women. This is a single gender school also, all female. After a lot of discussion and thought, they realized that a boarding school probably wasn't the best idea, so they came back with just a plain non-boarding situation. There is no EMO. They were assisted in the application by Success Charter Partners, and they were deemed, their application was deemed complete. Okay. The second school is Greenville Preparatory Academy. They originally applied as Phoenix Preparatory Academy. We already have a Phoenix Academy school in North Carolina, so they agreed to change their name. They're going to be in Pitt County. Their proposed grades are, first year will be K5, 400 students. Year 2, K6, 480. Year 3, K7, 555. Year 4, K8, 605. And year 5, K9, 655. When they're at capacity, they will be a K-12 school in their 8th year, and they'll have 805 students. They will have a lunch program, but they won't be participating in the National Food Lunch Program. They will offer transportation. They are offering a weighted lottery. They have not identified, they don't have a facility, but they have identified a location. They're cooperating with a senior living project that's being built into Pitt County. They were assisted in their application by Leaders Building Leaders, and no EMO or no CMO, and their application was deemed complete. I would like to add that of these 7 applications, none of them are being assisted by an EMO or a CMO. The next school is Honor Preparatory Charter School, going to be located in Mecklenburg. Their proposed grades are, first year will be K1, 132 students. Year 2, K2, 219. Year 3, K3, 309. Year 4, K4, 399. K5 for their 5th year, 489. When they're at full capacity, they will be K5, 549. They will be participating in the National School Lunch Program. They are offering transportation. They are implementing a weighted lottery. They propose to be in the zip code in Mecklenburg County at 28213 or 28215. And they were assisted by Build, Excel, and Sustain, which is a very well national known organization that supports charter schools. I think they're based out of Boston, and their application was deemed complete. The next one is Movement School Southwest. They're in Mecklenburg County. They already have several schools, and bring your attention that this is a school organization that has replicated Sugar Creek. Their first year, they'll be K1 with 250 students, K2 with 360, K3 460, K4 555. Year 5, they'll be K5 645. When they're at capacity, they will be K5 at 645. They will participate in the school lunch program. They are offering transportation. They are not offering implementing a weighted lottery. They have already identified their facility, and their application was deemed complete. I can add about Movement. Again, this is an excellent organization that serves a much-needed population, and CSAB was even encouraging them to please think about opening a middle school. The next application is Nalanda Academy, which will be in Wake County. Year 1, there'll be K2, 146 students. Next year is K3, 196, K4, 246, K5, 296, K6, 346. When they're at capacity, they'll be K8. They will be offering lunch, but not with the National School Lunch Program. They will be offering transportation. They will be offering a weighted lottery. They have not identified a facility yet, but they're going to be, their proposed location is in the 27560 zip code. They were not assisted by an EMO or CMO, and their application was deemed complete. The next one is Wayne STEM Academy, going to be in Wayne County. Their proposed enrollment grades, their first year will be K3, 292, K4, 380, K5, 468, K5, 490. Year 5, they're going to be K5, 216. When they're at capacity is in their 5th year, which is K5, 519. They will offer lunch through a local vendor. They are going to offer transportation. They are implementing a weighted lottery. No facility yet, but they're going to be in the 27533 zip code. And they got assistance from Leaders Building Leaders in their application. It's interesting, most of these schools are implementing a weighted lottery, and we're not doing another round for the NC Access program, so there'll be no extra funding. I think that again, I just want to compliment CSAB for increasing the rigor, knowing that if you want to get approved or make a recommendation by CSAB, you need to make sure that you are lowering as many barriers as you possibly can. Okay, and the last application is West Triangle High School. This is a replication of Research Triangle High School, one of our more successful high schools. Year 1, they plan on being grades 9, 10 for 150 students. Next year will be 9, 11, 300, 9, 12, 450, 9, 12, 600. Year 5 will be 9, 12, 600, and they'll be at capacity at 600. They're going to be located in Orange County, but their goal and mission is to be a regional high school for the surrounding counties. They will participate in the National School Lunch Program. They will offer transportation. They will implement a weighted lottery. They have not identified a facility yet, and their application was deemed complete. So those are the 7 schools that we're presenting today for discussion, and we'll be voting next month.
I know you have questions. If you have not had an opportunity to do so yet, on the first page where the executive summary, the entire application is hyperlinked under each name, so you can click on that and read the application. Questions about particular schools at this time? Ms. Kamnitz.
Yes, a couple of schools that I'd like some more information on, and starting with the West Triangle High School that you just described. So I noticed that they are being given 3 years instead of 2 to be ready to open. And I'm sort of surprised, why did they not just wait a year to apply, unless there's some compelling reason why we're breaking our own. I'm not sure if it's statutory where the 2 years comes from, but why are we breaking our own rules to give them an extra year?
Well, actually, that is a great question, and we are not breaking our own rules because CSAB voted Monday to make it a regular application with just a 2-year timeline. They were, we thought, very innovative. They wanted to go ahead and get started, but they know that getting a charter school off the ground in a high school and in the Triangle area where property is very expensive, they wanted a longer runway. Once we realized that wasn't possible, we notified them, and they understand.
Thank you. And then my other area of concern is around Wayne STEM. And we all received, I believe, a copy of the district impact statement, which I read, as I always do, and then I went back and looked at the minutes of the January meeting when that application was approved. And there are some concerns raised in the letter that I don't see reflected in the CSAB discussion from January, and perhaps it just didn't make the minutes, but concerns about still some confusion about and perhaps there's not, but the question of whether there's a CMO or not, concerns about the board's experience level and representation locally, questions about the budget, and just, was that ever discussed in CSAB, and do you have answers?
I can let Ms. Turner maybe expand on the answer, but this is a repeat application. When they came to CSAB the very first time, there was so much confusion with this application. Was it an EMO? Was it not a CMO? Were people on the board going to be involved in providing services to the school? That was the biggest reason they were turned down. So when they came back the second year, I think they cleaned up a lot of those issues. There was no discussion about whether they were an EMO or a CMO or any type of support charter organization at the CSAB level. That never did come up.
It sounded like there was an awful lot of entanglement with this legacy, I can't remember the legacy something, this organization. And,
You want
The first time they came before us, that was the issue, this whole thing about legacy. When they came before us the second time, they said that they have disentangled from that altogether. Completely.
They have no relationship in any way,
That's what they
shape,
told
or
us.
form.
That's what they told us.
Because okay, there's concerns after what we've just been through, that
Yes,
should be
I know,
absolutely cleared
I
down.
totally understand.
And close monitoring. The board and its makeup and what the board brings to the table.
We felt comfortable with the board, that they had improved it considerably since the first time they came, and we felt comfortable with the board. First of all, they were all there so that we were able to actually talk to all the people on the board. They seemed, and we were strategic about, we don't want to hear from one person, we want to hear from several different people. And everybody seemed to have some sense of what the school was about, how it was going to be organized. There was a finance person who actually understood finance. And so we were pretty comfortable with the board this time. We were not the first time. The first time, they also didn't have very many people from Wayne.
And that I couldn't tell whether that had been remedied.
That had been improved, yes.
So what's the proportion on the board?
I don't remember the exact, but there were the first time there were none. There were representatives from the county that time.
With appropriate experience?
I'm sorry?
With appropriate experience?
Yes.
Right, so, okay.
There were several board members on the Wayne STEM board that were board members with Emerald Bladen, that was opened up several years ago, which has been a good charter school. I think they're in their 5th or 6th year. So there was experience on the board because they were on the founding board of Emerald Bladen.
So are these folks that are on several charter boards, is that how?
They were. They're only on this one, but they helped start Emerald Bladen. They're not on those boards anymore.
Thank you.
Good questions. Vice Chair Duncan?
Thank you. We're familiar with the impact statement from Wayne. Were there impact statements for others? I have not had a chance to study them if they were. So that's why I asked. Did all of them have impact statements?
What we're proposing to you right now?
Yes.
The only impact statement we have not received is from Mecklenburg County. They have, in the past, have not submitted an impact statement. We do have one from every other application, I believe.
At this point in time, what is CSAB's handling or treatment of impact statements?
We read them. When we find discrepancies, we ask about them specifically. We generally do not talk much about, when we get impact statements that say it's going to take money out of the district, if you are coming in and you tell me you're going to take 10% of the district, we're going to talk about that. If you're just saying that the district will lose money if the children move, well, the money moves with the children, so we generally don't discuss that. But other kinds of issues, like sometimes the impact statement will say that the application gave us information that's not correct about the district, or that the application will say that the schools are overcrowded, but that's really not the case, and they'll provide information that says that's really not the case, and this is what the capacity of these schools are. And when those things happen, we do bring those up in the interview.
While you're there, if you don't mind, could I ask another question?
Sure.
The more general question. The way I heard it, is it correct that 6 out of the 7 accepted applicants do not yet have a facility.
That's probably correct.
So what is CSAP's consideration in setting in progress to their preparation? If we are to approve it, I'm sorry. Let me start again. It's not fair to you to have an interrupted question. What is CSAB's approach with the one-year preparation time when there's not yet a facility? Because we have had, as you know, come back to us a bunch of schools.
Particularly in the last couple of years.
Asking for extensions because they didn't have a facility. And that has caused some issues with the local districts because they're not always in the same area. In fact, they're significantly different areas is what we've seen. So to me, that's of increasing concern. So it was of interest, at least to me, to get some sense of how that's handled by CSAP.
We ask about facility. However, if you're on the regular timeline, you really don't have to have a facility. In the last 2 years, you'll notice we've started to ask what zip code are you planning to be in, because before they were just telling us a county. But we really don't press hard on facility if you're going to be on the regular timeline. We have mentioned to people things like the number of people that have had to ask for extensions, supply chain issues, the building issues that people have experienced over the last couple of years. I will tell you, everybody tells us they have no problem. They know they can get it done. Everybody says that.
So they say that, but then we see them again in several instances. Right. So that's not completely reassuring.
No, it wasn't completely reassuring to us either, but however, we can't. There's not a requirement to have a facility if you're on the regular timeline, so I have to take your word for it until you show up and tell me you can't do it.
Maybe the question that helps get to the root of the question. Does the board take into account with any sense of whether or not to accept an application the fact that there's not a facility that you have been identified?
There would have to be more to it than that. So if you don't have a facility identified, and then as we talk to you, you really don't have a clear idea of what even kind of facility you're looking for. There's nobody on your board who has any expertise at being able to help you get a facility. If we have those kinds of issues, and that also means we've got some weakness in the board, that would be an issue.
Okay, if I ask the last question. Last question would be, 6 out of the 7 of these schools appear to be in districts that already have significant charter school presence and are higher tax dollar counties or communities. Does CSAP take into account that there's some saturation point of how much of these
We've actually been told that we cannot consider saturation. We heavily encourage schools that are moving into places that don't have charters, particularly rural counties. We really, really encourage that. But if you want to go to Mecklenburg, you want to go to Wake, we were told we could not deny a charter because of saturation.
So how many, this really is the last question, how many LEAs around the state do not have a charter school in their district?
That I don't know, but do you know?
I don't know that exact number, and I can get it for you by tomorrow, but I would say probably we have charter schools in probably 55% of the LEAs in North Carolina right now, but I can get you the exact number in the morning.
So that would be 55% out of 115?
Yes, sir. Yeah. And to expand on your facility question, when a school is in its planning year, they have 5 ready-to-open planning sessions that we have, and at every one of those sessions, we're asking for an update on facility and enrollment, because we know that they can learn all about running a charter school in proper operations, but if they don't have a facility and they don't have students, they're not going to be successful. So that is a very high emphasis during our training sessions.
Thank you for answering my questions.
And I would venture to say in today's real estate market that no one is signing on the bottom line without a charter approved. And so you can look at a number of different, let's just say you were going to rent or you were going to convert an existing retail space. You could think you have it, and you could tell CSAB that you have it. It's great. I'm going to convert the Kmart on X space, and you get the charter, and you go back, and it's been rented to somebody else. So it would be almost impossible to have that in hand before a charter is signed. Impossible, unless there's an unbelievable amount of capital in someone's hands.
Well, one of my responses would be there are a lot of counties around the state where that's not true, and they don't have charter schools.
So the question would be, is it the intent of the question to penalize schools that don't have, that can't identify a facility in the time granted for ready to open, or is there an opportunity for the board to rethink the timeline, the acceptable timeline to identify a facility if the strength of the application is strong? And so working through that issue, I think, is policy, not statute. Is that not correct? And given the current climate with supply chain deadlines, some supply chain issues, and particularly in counties where it is hard to move quickly, that might be something we want to consider.
In our office, it's constantly assisting these applications with what it requires to get an educational certificate of occupancy. They might say, we're going to take over this big box store. And I said, okay, but this is a process to get that CO for educational purposes. So again, that's a high priority in our training.
Yes. Any further questions? Okay, you've got a month to ask questions and get them to Mr. Machado, Ms. Turner, and their teams. And so we've got a couple of items for consent. EICS, thank you, Mr. Machado and Ms. Turner, especially for making the trip. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Machado.
Yeah. Alexis just told me that we have, out of the 100 counties, we have charter schools in 66 of them.
That's 66 out of 115 LEAs.
Out of 100 counties, not LEAs, but yeah. Okay.
Thank you for the update. Thank you, Ms. Schaus. EICS 7 is a restart. I'll just go through these quickly. The restart application from Pitt County Schools. EICS 8 is the report to the EOC on the Career and College Promise. We had an update on that last month. You'll just remember that because of lack of data, we weren't able to complete that in its entirety. EICS 9 is Sugar Creek Charter's request to implement a weighted lottery. EICS 10 is Thomas Jefferson Classical Academy's weighted lottery request. Number 11 is another report to the JLEOC Virtual Charter School Enrollment. Again, that was enrollment only, no academic data. EICS 12 was a request by Tiller School to amend its vision and mission statement. You can check that out as listed on eBoard. And EICS 13 was a final report to the JLEOC on dual enrollment and the opportunity study. And Mr. Chair, that concludes our report. Might I add, it's 5:11 and we made the deadline.
Ms. White, you win the gold star as the shortest committee meeting of the day. Finishing ahead of time. Thank you so much. My thanks to board colleagues, advisors, our superintendent, and DPI staff, and all other contributors for today's meeting. That concludes our committee updates. I now ask for a motion to go into closed session, and note for the audience and online listeners that following closed session, the March 2nd, 2022 meeting will adjourn immediately. Vice Chair Duncan. Sorry, didn't warn you.
It's all right. I move that we go
Treasurer Falwell makes the motion.
Stand by just a moment so I can get a motion on the floor.
I move that we go into
Go ahead.
I move that we go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute Section 143-318.11 A1, 3, and 6 to prevent the disclosure of information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute Sections 115C-319 and 321. and for the purpose of consulting with our attorneys in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorneys and the public body, including specifically to consider the cases of Bauer versus DPI and Reeves versus Williamson et al. And finally, to consider the qualifications, competence, performance, or condition of appointment of public officers or employees or prospective public officers or employees.
Motion by Vice Chair Duncan. Is there a second?
Second by Treasurer Falwell.
Second by the Treasurer. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes, motion carries. If you're in the room, pause for just a moment. We will go into closed session at 5:20. 5:20.
Looking through that, although I didn't read all of ours. Oh, good. Started paging through it.